This photographer is a great example of what you can produce when you allow yourself to be influenced by artists and mediums outside of the ones you specifically use to create your own art, and the benefits that come from collaborating with those types of artists. He played a major part in the avant-garde arts and photography that came out of Japan following World War II, worked with novelists, dancers, architects, and other photographers to take his photography and documentary skills into more deeply thought out concepts, and was the mentor of legendary Japanese street photographer Daido Moriyama, whose photography clearly draws from the lessons taught to him by this man. This is Insight for Inspiration, Eikoh Hosoe. In 1944, during World War II, Hosoe saw the firebombing of Tokyo. This event greatly impacted his life, as it dramatically changed his childhood when his family was forced to move out of the city and into the village of Tohoku. They would stay there throughout the war, until eventually coming back to Tokyo years later. The war in general, and its effects on Japanese society, became something he reflected on regularly in many projects in the years that followed. During high school, he won a Fuji photo contest that gave him the confidence to chase photography as a profession. He did this by attending Tokyo College of Photography, where he joined a group called Democrato, led by avant-garde artist Eikoh, whose trippy work clearly motivated Hosoe to create unique work of his own. After college, he took up jobs as a freelance photographer, before moving on to create and join collectives that would be highly influential to his work and in the history and legacy of Japanese photography. In his mid-20s, Hosoe was involved in a number of projects that heavily influenced and inspired a style that has gone worldwide, but it's one that I typically associate with Japanese street photography first and foremost. VIVO was a photography collective that began in 1957. Hosoe formed this group in collaboration with a number of photographers who were all members of a historically significant exhibition in Japan's photography history called Eyes of 10, which was created to show 10 voices that were changing documentary photography at the time in Japan. VIVO highlighted actions of photographers in the post-war era that looked to comment on tradition and change taking place in the country throughout a movement called the Image School, that was meant to elicit a response from viewers about where the line was drawn between photography as an art form and as a form of documenting evidence. They wanted to create these photos as a way of resisting post-war Americanization through the subject of post-war Japan, its modernity, its identity, and its wartime past, which was silenced but not gone. They changed how documentary photography was produced by attempting to make their photos an experience on their own, instead of simply documenting what was happening in their world through the experiences people were having. They accomplished this through their clear concepts, a meticulous sense of composition and framing, coupled with a heavy emphasis on the symbolic. The collective used the unconventional techniques of collage, double exposures, and extremely high contrast photos to convey ideas of Japanese identity, sexuality, and social inequality. In Hosoe's own words, "To me, photography can be simultaneously a record and a mirror or window of self-expression. The camera is generally assumed to be unable to depict that which is not visible to the eye. And yet, the photographer who wields it well can depict what lies unseen in his memory." Although VIVO only lasted a few years, the influence of the group can be seen throughout Japanese street photography history and established an artistic voice and style that ties many of Japan's street photographers together. First, through the Provoke Collective, which started a short time afterwards and famously included world-renowned street photographer Daido Moriyama. And today, through the work of many of the photographers involved in a street photography collective called Void Tokyo, which includes well-known photographer Tatsuo Suzuki, whose work is clearly informed to some degree by Moriyama, Provoke, VIVO, and Hosoe. Near the time that VIVO was ending, Hosoe, along with others, formed the Jazz Film Laboratory, with the intent and purpose of creating experimental, expressive, and intense films. Hosoe's main contribution to the group was a film titled Naval and the A-Bomb. The film is a commentary on the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, shown through Butoh dancing. The two themes of Naval and the A-Bomb are death in terms of how all we know could be lost and destroyed as a result of these types of cataclysmic events that convey a feeling of hopelessness, but also the theme of new life that has the potential to spring out of tragedy. Clearly, this was a continuation of many of the things he was already commenting on. What initially brought me to the work of Eikoh Hosoe was the fact that he was the mentor of Daido Moriyama, whose photography I absolutely love. In 1961, Moriyama became Eikoh Hosoe's assistant. One of the projects he worked on specifically was titled Ordeal by Roses. That has to have had a dramatic impact on Moriyama's work and is always cited when you do research on either of the two men. Ordeal by Roses was a set of erotic photos involving highly renowned Japanese author, poet, playwright, actor, model, and nationalist Yukio Mishima, who definitely needs his own video or videos to thoroughly explain and truly understand. Upon the first photography session between the two figures, Mishima told Hosoe, "I will give myself up to you as the subject matter for your camera. I want you to feel free to use me as you see fit, and take whatever images your vision suggests." Hosoe took these words as truth and created some of his most highly regarded work out of the experience. In this controversial work, being allowed to conduct photos in whatever manner he wanted, Hosoe tested Mishima's limits. On their first day of working together, Hosoe had the author's body wrapped in a garden hose as he stood on a marble pedestal in front of his father and wife. Later, it resulted in attempts to replicate compositions from Giorgione's Sleeping Venus and Botticelli's Birth of Venus. These sessions caused Hosoe to have concerns that he had pushed things too far, and with anxiety, he questioned Moriyama about whether or not he thought he had made Mishima angry during the lapse in time between the shooting and hearing from the writer. A few days later, a call came from Mishima's agent to let Hosoe know that his feelings were actually the complete opposite, and that Mishima was enormously pleased with the photos, and is very happy. He wanted to convey his thanks. The two would work together on this project in 1961 and 62, until a new version was put together in 1970 to rearrange the photos and have chapter titles given by Mishima himself. Hauntingly, the final chapter was titled Death, only months before Mishima committed ritual death on November 25, 1970. Another one of Hosoe's longtime collaborators was Tatsumi Hijikata. Hosoe's interest in dance is what led the two men to meet. They first encountered one another when Hijikata debuted a new style of dance called Butoh in 1959. As someone who knows next to nothing about dance, Butoh is a bit difficult to pin down and paraphrase exactly what it is and what it looks like. But in short, it involves highly choreographed movements, dancers covered in white makeup, and grotesque imagery and environments to explore taboo topics. It was created as a response to the dance forms that were becoming more and more influential in Japan after World War II, that Hijikata believed were too focused on replicating modern styles, Western dance, and ballet. His reaction involved creating a style that was meant to be uniquely Japanese and revealing of certain looked down upon truths about the country's culture. It not only broke away from Western styles, but classical dance in general, as a way of also drawing attention to the less pleasant sides of Japanese society through its outcast, its so-called non-people, the vagrants, drunks, homeless, and impoverished, being observed through the dancer's use of material that included them, to inspire his Butoh dance. Specifically, a novel by Yukio Mishima titled Forbidden Colors, which follows a cruel perverted mentorship that involves an erotic downward spiral into the gay underworld of post-war Japan. This first Butoh performance, which ended in Hijikata receiving outstanding applause after its climax that involved breaking the neck of a chicken and spilling blood all over the stage, would establish connections between Yukio Mishima, Tatsumi Hijikata, and Eikoh Hosoe that played a part in the creative outputs of all three men from that point forward. Japan's post-war avant-garde movement would prove to be highly influential for and inspired by Hosoe, as he collaborated with Hijikata on work that would collide with changing attitudes towards art and photography taking place in Japan at the time. Hijikata and Hosoe would work together for around a decade, and one project titled Kamaitachi would be one of the high points of each man's creative career. These photos are based on a religious myth about a demon who haunts victims of a village with his claws that look like sickles. To create this project, the two men had help from locals, who seemed to have thoroughly enjoyed playing their part as the tortured souls in these scenes. The project was meant to be a reflection on Hosoe's own life and experience with World War II, and a take on how rural areas in Japan were quickly developing after the war, which he feared might cause a loss of culture, as the area's traditions looked as if they were becoming casualties of change. I decided to record the Tohoku area, specifically the northeast portion, which was, as it turned out, the birthplace of both Hijikata and myself. In the mid-1960s, Japan, especially its countryside, was evolving rapidly. I was afraid that this rural region, from my memories, would be totally transformed, becoming nothing but flat and faceless terrain, a victim of modernization. I had decided I did not want to be a traditional documentary photographer, recording a place and its people directly. Furthermore, I was a much greedier photographer than that. To become the unique documentary photographer Hosoe wanted to be, he worked with Hijikata in a fast and hectic manner that involved running around rice fields, having fun with villagers and farmers, and messing with village children. The power of Eikoh Hosoe's work comes largely from the fact that he knew balance was required between himself and his subjects, so that their performances would hold just as much weight as his photography skills in order to create high-quality work. This is abundantly clear in the photos he created with Hijikata and Mishima, but honestly, it rings true for most of his work. Today, Eikoh Hosoe is the director of a photographic arts museum, which is a position he's held since 1995. He continues to receive accolades and awards for his photography achievements, and I hope he remains a name in photography and art that is not forgotten. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment to help push this video forward, and until next time, keep developing.